There are two countries inside every country. You live in one, the wealthy live in the other. Same borders, same flag, completely different rules. In the first country, a nurse in Ohio earning $60,000 pays federal tax, state tax, Social Security, Medicare. Roughly 30% vanishes before the paycheck arrives. In the second country, a trust fund heir in Manhattan controls $80 million in assets. This year, they'll pay close to nothing. Not through illegal schemes. Through a parallel legal system most people never see. This isn't theory, this is blueprint. And the blueprint has a name you've probably never heard. Sir Frederick Winslow Taylor, died 1915. Engineer who revolutionized factories by breaking work into measurable units. Time studies, efficiency charts, every motion of every worker tracked and optimized. Taylor's logic transformed American manufacturing. It also transformed how power hides itself. Because while Taylor was measuring workers, another system was being built in the shadows. A system to make wealth unmeasurable. Picture this: 1913. Same year the Federal Reserve is created. Same year the 16th Amendment passes, establishing income tax. Two systems born together. One designed to track labor. One designed to track capital. But here's what nobody tells you. They were never meant to work the same way. Labor is visible. You clock in. You clock out. Every hour documented. Capital is invisible. It flows across borders, transforms between legal entities, hides in structures with names like limited liability companies, grantor retained annuity trusts, Delaware statutory trusts. The Rockefeller family understood this immediately. John D. Rockefeller Sr., once the richest American in history, paid income tax on his salary. But in 1913, the same year income tax began, the family created trusts that still exist today. 111 years later, 5 generations later, the wealth remains largely untaxed, not stolen, structured. When Junior died in 1960, the estate was valued at only $1.5 billion, despite the family controlling far more. How? Assets had already moved into irrevocable trusts, foundations, entities the estate tax couldn't touch. Compare this to Sarah, not her real name, working in Denver as a physical therapist. Sarah earns $90,000. Sounds comfortable, but after federal tax, state tax, Social Security, Medicare, student loan payments, she takes home about $55,000. $35,000 disappeared into systems she can't control. Meanwhile, the grandson of a shipping magnate in Connecticut borrows $2 million against a stock portfolio worth $40 million. He buys a house, lives well, pays zero income tax that year. The loan isn't income. Loans are never taxed. The stocks keep growing. In 10 years, the portfolio hits $70 million. The loan gets refinanced. He still hasn't paid income tax. And when he dies, depending on how it's structured, his children might inherit everything with what's called a stepped-up basis. All that growth, decades of appreciation, never taxed. 2 countries. Sarah's country has W-2 forms, automatic withholding, April 15th deadlines. The other country has family offices in South Dakota, dynastic trusts in Delaware, foundations that legally avoid taxes while technically doing charity. Both systems are legal. Both are American. But only one feels like a trap. Here's the part that makes your blood pressure rise. This isn't accidental. In 1954, Congress debated taxing unrealized capital gains, gains on assets you haven't sold yet. It would have closed the loophole. The proposal died in committee. In 1976, Congress considered forcing trusts to pay out or face taxation. Killed. 2010, serious discussion about wealth tax, dead on arrival. Every attempt to make the two countries play by the same rules gets suffocated before it starts. Why? Because by the time you're rich enough to benefit from the second system, you're rich enough to fund the politicians writing the laws. The question isn't whether this is fair. Fair is a kindergarten concept. The question is how it works. How do billions become invisible? How do dynasties last centuries while your paycheck disappears in weeks? To understand that, we need to see the machine. Not the propaganda version, the actual gears and levers. Imagine water. Pour it into a glass, it's a liquid. Freeze it, it becomes solid. Heat it, it turns to steam. Same molecules, different states. Different rules apply to each state. This is exactly what happens to money in the second country. The machine doesn't hide money, it transforms it. Income becomes capital, capital becomes loans, loans become lifestyle. And at each transformation, taxes disappear. Let me show you the machine in action. Meet the Johnson family. Not real, but completely typical. Grandfather started a regional grocery chain in Texas in 1965. Worked brutal hours, built it to 40 stores, sold to a national chain in 2005 for $300 million. Here's where it gets interesting. He didn't take $300 million in cash. Cash would mean capital gains tax, roughly $60 million gone immediately. Instead, he took stock in the acquiring company, stock transfer, special tax treatment. Then he created something called a charitable remainder trust, put $150 million of stock into it. The trust sells the stock, pays zero capital gains tax because it's a charity. The trust then invests the money. Johnson gets 5% annually for life, about $7.5 million per year. His kids get the same deal when he dies. After 2 generations, whatever remains goes to the Johnson Family Foundation. Here's the genius. That foundation is controlled by Johnson family members. They sit on the board, they decide where grants go, they draw salaries for managing it. The money never really left the family. It just changed form, from taxable income to tax-exempt foundation, with generational control. The IRS sees charity, the Johnsons see dynasty. But that's just level 1. Level 2 is what the ultra-wealthy do. They don't wait to sell, they never sell. Mark Zuckerberg, as of 2024, has borrowed over $1 billion using Facebook stock as collateral. Think about that. Billion-dollar lifestyle. Zero income reported from those loans. Jeff Bezos reportedly did similar. Elon Musk too. They borrow at 2, maybe 3% interest. Their stocks grow at 10, 15, 20%. The gap between growth and interest is tax-free wealth creation. And when they die, stepped-up basis erases all gains. Their heirs inherit at current market value. All that appreciation, decades of growth, vanishes from tax records like it never existed. Now contrast this with Skuksta warehouse worker in Memphis. Marcus earns $42,000. Every dollar is W-2 income. Federal tax hits it. State tax hits it. Social Security hits it. By the time Marcus sees his paycheck, $35,000 remains. He can't borrow against future earnings. He can't create a trust. He can't play the transformation game. His money enters his life in one form and stays that form, fully visible, fully taxed, fully trapped. The machine has another component. It's called the Grantor Retained Annuity Trust, GRAT for short. Here's how it works. You're wealthy. You put $10 million in rapidly appreciating assets into a GRAT. The IRS values those assets today. You promise to take back $10 million plus minimal IRS interest over 2 years. Anything the assets grow beyond that goes to your kids tax-free. If you pick the right assets, ones that explode in value, you've just transferred massive wealth, paying almost nothing. Wealth managers call this the Walton GRAT because the Walmart family used it to move tens of billions to the next generation. Not illegal, barely taxed, completely invisible to regular Americans. There's also the Puerto Rico trick. Thanks to Act 60, if you move to Puerto Rico and become a resident, capital gains on assets acquired after the move are taxed at 0%. Zero. Not federal. Not state. Nothing. Dozens of crypto billionaires did this during the boom. Buy coins for pennies, move to San Juan. Sell at millions. Pay nothing. Meanwhile, a software engineer in California selling stock options pays 37% federal plus 13.3% state. Over half gone. Same country. Different planets. But here's where the machine reveals its true brilliance. It doesn't just transform money, it transforms identity. The nurse paying 30% thinks of herself as middle class. The heir paying near zero thinks of himself as a job creator, philanthropist, businessman. The system assigns moral value to each position. She's a taxpayer, responsible citizen. He's an economic engine. Both labels are propaganda. She's trapped in the first country. He's free in the second. The morality play is cover for the wealth gap. Frederick Taylor taught us to measure everything. Time per rivet, movements per hour. But nobody measures this. Nobody calculates the gap between what Sarah pays and what the trust fund heir pays. Because once you measure it, once you see it clearly, the system looks less like meritocracy and more like something else entirely. And that something else has been building for a very long time. 1931, middle of the Great Depression, 25% unemployment, bread lines in every city. And in Delaware, a quiet law passes. It allows trusts to exist in perpetuity. Forever. No limit. Most states had rules. Trust must dissolve after 90 years, after the death of the last known beneficiary. Something. Delaware said no limits. Create it once. It lasts eternally. South Dakota followed. Alaska. Nevada. A race to the bottom, each state competing to host dynastic wealth. Why does this matter? Because in the first country where you live, wealth resets every generation. You work, you save, you die. Your kids start over, minus whatever estate tax applies. In the second country, wealth compounds forever. The trust grows, pays out to heirs. But the principle stays intact, keeps growing, keeps paying out. Your great-great-great-grandchildren inherit not money but a machine that produces money eternally. The Pitcairn family did this, made a fortune from PPG Industries, the glass and paint company. In the 1986, they created what's called a family office, not a hedge fund. A private wealth management company serving only the Pitcairn family. Over 1,000 descendants now benefit. The family office manages billions, provides financial planning, tax strategy, investment management for every Pitcairn heir. Some of those heirs never work a day. They don't need to. The machine runs without them. Or look at the Cox family, media empire built over a century, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Cox Communications, auto trader, worth over $30 billion, 3 generations. The wealth hasn't been divided and conquered by estate taxes. It's been protected, grown, multiplied through trusts and holding companies. Kim Cox, current heiress, is worth an estimated $15 billion. Her tax rate? Likely single digits. How? Because she doesn't take a salary. She owns assets managed through entities designed for tax efficiency. Now compare this to Jennifer, school teacher in Arizona. Jennifer's grandmother left her $15,000, enough for a decent used car. That's generational wealth in the first country. One-time cash, taxed when earned. Taxed again as estate if it's big enough, then spent and gone. Jennifer's kids won't inherit a trust. They'll inherit maybe some savings if she's lucky. The machine doesn't exist for her family. It exists for families whose names you see on hospital wings. But the dynasty engine isn't just about money sitting in trusts. It's about access. The Pitcairn family office employs former IRS officials, tax attorneys, wealth strategists. When tax law changes, they're ready. When loopholes open, they're first through. When Congress debates reform, they're funding the opposition. The engine has defense mechanisms. It protects itself. Consider family foundations. The Walton Family Foundation, tied to Walmart wealth, holds billions. Technically a charity. Required to give away 5% annually, but that 5% can go to causes the family cares about, providing influence, legacy, control. The other 95% grows tax-free. The foundation pays salaries to family members who run it, and the family's public image shifts from billionaires to philanthropists. The machine doesn't just preserve wealth. It launders reputation. Here's the math that breaks people's brains. If you have 10 million in assets growing at 8% annually and you spend $500,000 per year, the principal grows forever. 10 million becomes 11 million, 12 million, 14 million. Compounding overwhelms spending. But this only works if you start with enough. If you have 100,000 in assets, grow it at 8% and need 50,000 per year to live, you're bankrupted in 3 years. The machine requires scale. Below a certain threshold, compound interest helps. Above that threshold, compound interest makes you dynastic, and nobody in the first country gets there by working. Jennifer can't save her way into dynasty. Marcus can't warehouse work his way to perpetual trusts. Sarah can't physical therapy her way to family foundations. The on-ramp to the second country isn't merit. It's inheritance, equity in a breakout startup, or an asset you already owned that exploded in value. For 99% of people, that on-ramp doesn't exist. What exists instead is propaganda. The myth that anyone can make it, that wealth is meritocratic, that the system rewards hard work. And to be clear, hard work does get rewarded in the first country. You can go from 40,000 to 90,000, from struggling to stable, but stable to dynastic? That gap isn't crossable by effort. It requires the machine, and the machine is invitation only. So when you hear about inequality, this is the structure underneath. Not greed, not luck, architecture, deliberately built over a century, refined with every tax code change, defended by armies of lawyers and lobbyists, and it's getting stronger. 2023 study from economists Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zuckman. They calculated effective tax rates for every slice of American wealth. Bottom 50% of earners pay about 25% when you include all taxes, federal, state, sales, everything. Top 0.1% pay about 23%. The richest 400 families in America pay less than working-class families. The curve doesn't keep going up. It bends backward. This isn't capitalism. This is something else. Benjamin Franklin supposedly said only two things are certain: death and taxes. He was half right. Death is universal. Taxes are negotiable if you're in the right country. The second country, the one with the machine. But here's what history teaches. Systems built on this level of separation don't last. Not because they're immoral. Morality is subjective. They don't last because they hollow out the foundation. When most people play by one set of rules while a tiny minority plays by another, belief in the system dies. And belief is what holds societies together. Not laws, not force. Belief that the game is fair enough to keep playing. Rome had this problem. The patrician class exempt from many taxes the plebeians paid. Took centuries, but the resentment became revolution. France, 1789, had this. The aristocracy, exempt from the tile, the main tax. Then came guillotines. Weimar Germany between the wars had this. Industrial dynasties thrived while the middle class drowned in hyperinflation. We know how that ended. Russia in the 90s had this. Oligarchs grabbed state assets for pennies. 2 decades later, those oligarchs learned their wealth existed only with state permission. Different ending, same instability. The American version hasn't reached crisis yet, but the signs are visible. Poll after poll shows trust in institutions collapsing. 60% of Americans believe the economy is rigged against them. They're not wrong. They just don't know the details. They feel the weight without seeing the machine. And that gap between feeling and knowing is dangerous, because when people understand how it works, 2 things happen. Either they demand reform or they stop playing the game entirely. Reform is possible. Tax unrealized gains above 10 million. Close the stepped-up basis loophole. Limit dynasty trusts to 2 generations. Require foundations to pay out 15% annually, not 5%. Coordinate internationally so wealth can't just flee to the Caymans. None of this is complicated. It's just opposed by people who benefit from the current design. The alternative to reform is breakdown. Not revolution, necessarily. Just slow collapse. People stop believing work leads to security. They stop having kids because kids are expensive and the future looks grim. They stop investing in communities because communities feel temporary. The social fabric unravels thread by thread. And history shows once that process starts, it's very hard to reverse. Frederick Taylor thought you could engineer humans into perfect efficiency. Measure everything, optimize everything, create systems that run like clockwork. He was right about one thing. Systems are powerful. They shape behavior. They create outcomes. But he missed something crucial. Systems need legitimacy. People need to believe the system serves them, at least partially. When the system obviously serves only the people running it, efficiency becomes irrelevant. The machine works perfectly, but nobody wants to feed it anymore. We're at the choice point. Reform the architecture while it's still possible, or wait for it to collapse under its own contradictions. History suggests we'll wait. We always do. Humans don't fix systems until crisis forces us. But here's the thing. This time, the crisis won't be one event. It'll be slow. A generation that can't buy homes. A generation that can't retire. A generation that realizes the ladder they're climbing doesn't actually go anywhere. And when that realization hits critical mass, the second country better hope the first country still believes in reform. Because if belief dies completely, what comes next won't be policy debates. It'll be something much harder to control. The machine is running, the dynasties are growing, the gap is widening, and the clock is ticking.